one. It was written in 1927 by James Weldon Johnson, and it is a very different and very special take on this.
And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. And as far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything. Blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. Then God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other, and God said, that's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun ablazing in the heavens. And the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world, and God said, that's good. And God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left. The stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was under his feet, and God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped and looked and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes, and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunders rolled, and the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little red flowers blossomed. The pine tree pointed his finger to the sky, and the oak spread out his arms. The lakes cuddled down in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea, and God smiled again. And the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his arm, and he waved his hand over the sea and over the land, and he said, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam. The rivers and the seas roamed the forests and the woods and split the air with their wings. And God said, that's good. Then God walked around, and God looked around on all that he had made. He looked at his sun. He looked at his moon. And he looked at his little stars. He looked on his world with all its living things, and God said, I'm lonely still. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. By a deep, wide river, he sat down with his head in his hands. God thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river, he kneeled him down. And there the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corner of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay, till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen. Amen.
universe? Was it God? As Christians, that's what we believe, isn't it? That's what the Bible tells us. In fact, it's the very first thing it tells us. First chapter, page 1, first sentence. In the beginning, God created. But isn't it true that the universe began with a big bang? That it started out dense and hot and then expanded? Who made you? Was that God? Again, that's what the Bible tells us. It tells us that on the 5th day, God created all living creatures, saving humans for last. But isn't it true that your parents created you? Or from a larger sense, that humans originated from ape-like ancestors, and that who we are today is the result of a long evolutionary process? Who made these vegetables? God? Wasn't it Judy, though, who planted the little shoots and tended the little plants? Wasn't it the sun that provided the warmth and the rain that caused enough moisture so that the little seeds, the little seedlings might germinate? And wasn't it the plant itself that produced the flowers that finally led to these vegetables? So, which is it? Who makes vegetables? Who makes humans? Who makes the universe? God? Or is it a matter of development, adaptation, and evolution like I just described? More often than not, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? There are those who will insist that God made everything and that science and evolution are lies. And then there are those who will insist that science can explain these things that we attribute to God, so God must be a lie. In fact, great battles have been fought between defenders of the faith and defenders of science, evolutionists and creationists. Great battles that are entirely pointless and unnecessary because when you think about it, evolution and creation answer two entirely different questions. My questions all began with who? Who makes the universe? Who creates humans? Who is the maker of the vegetables? And if your answer to the question was God, then you answered correctly. The Bible tells us, in the beginning, God created. But evolution and science correctly answer a different question, and that is the question of how. So, in order to appreciate the biblical creation story, the first thing that we have to be clear about is which question does it intend to answer? Who created the heavens and the earth? Well, God did. How? You're going to have to talk to a scientist to learn the answer to that. Sadly, when evolutionists and creationists face off, they're totally missing the intent of the story. The book of Genesis begins with a love poem describing our creation, and in the past 200 years, science has opened the window to many of the details. Now we have insight to the mathematics, the physics, and the biology that keeps things running. And we've discovered that it's nothing short of a miracle. Einstein once said, there are two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. Think about it. In the beginning, God used God's limitless energy to spark a big bang within a framework of laws finely tuned in their math and their science. energy transformed into matter, the immaterial giving birth to the material universe. And from this explosive beginning, matter has been creatively growing in complexity through chemical and biological developments. Matter that appears to be self-organizing and regulating, obeying its own instruction manual. God took care of the details and the ordering of the universe so that the earth, sky, water, and land, all of the creeping things, and the birds in the air, the cattle, and the fish, all came into being, and God declared them good. And then God created humans. Humans who enjoy a particularly close relationship with God. Humans who have been given the responsibility of ensuring the good of the rest of creation. And God declared them very good. It might surprise you to learn that this first creation story was written and handed down to us by a people whose lives were anything but good. The story comes to us from the Israelites who wrote it while they were in exile in Babylon. At the time of its writing, Jerusalem had already been destroyed, and the people had been carried off across the desert to live out their days in a foreign land, under foreign rule, under foreign rulers who worshiped foreign gods. They experienced poverty, unemployment, famine, hunger. Their future was bleak, and in the face of all that they had lost and all that they had suffered, they began to lose hope. All around them, the world had grown formless, void of meaning, and chaos seemed to reign supreme. In the midst of that exile and suffering, the people began asking deep and hard questions about who they were and how they had gotten there. And from these questions came forth this majestic affirmation that in the midst of a world where all their dreams had been defeated and all had been lost, God is in fact the creator of all. God is in fact the ruler of all life, and it is God who speaks through the chaos so that order may emerge. In a world that seemed to have no meaning, in a world ruled by chaos and confusion, they clearly saw God at work making order. They saw God taking the matter of their chaotic reality and rearranging it in new ways so that meaning began to emerge. And through this affirmation, the people began to see that the seemingly all-powerful monster of chaos was not bigger than God, that the void filling their lives was absolutely nothing compared to God, and that even in the middle of all that turmoil and uncertainty, God was putting things where they belonged. Even there, God was creating meaningful life. Even there, God was making things and declaring them good. It makes me think about our own world today, because let's face it, ours is a world filled with chaos. When I look at the world today, it doesn't seem as though there's room for much beyond worry and weeping. Fires, floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, fighting, bickering, people existing without food, shelter, and medical attention, and of course, the ever-growing threat of nuclear extinction. All over the world, countries and societies are in an upheaval. The great American dream, which once moved entire generations forward, suddenly seems blurry and out of focus. The promise of prosperity no longer extends to all people, and many of us face the reality that our children's future might not be as good as our own. Even future of the earth upon which we stand, this beautiful, gorgeous earth with its waters and skies and ecosystems, is uncertain and threatened. Few will deny that things are looking pretty bleak. And in the face of such bleakness, it's hard not to lose hope. And in our hopelessness, we lash out. We lash out with violence and hatred. All around us, we see the hands of terrorism at work. All around us, we see the hands of racism, extremism, and nationalism at work. These are the monsters of chaos, and they feel overwhelming. We feel powerless in the face of their irrepressible advance. It's easy to feel that the world has become void of meaning. It's easy to lose hope. So maybe it's time once again to ask those deep and hard questions about who we are and how we got here. Who created us? God. And as our Creator, God is bigger than all of the violence, hatred, injustice, and brokenness that humans can muster. God is bigger than the monster of chaos. Here in our world today, God is setting things in their proper places. Here in this time, God is taking the meaningless void in our present world and rearranging it in new and meaningful ways. Here in our world, God is creating new order and new life out of the stuff of chaos. Here among us, God is making things and still declaring that they are good. Can we see what God is doing? Can we, like the ancient Israelites, look up and see a Creator God who is bigger than our present reality, scooping up the chaos and the void that seems so deep and forming it, shaping it, creating it into something new? Today is the kickoff to the fall season in the church and in the world, and it's also the opening of the narrative lectionary cycle. And with everything going on today in the world, especially with a huge hurricane bearing down once again on a sizable portion of this country, we need something big. And what is bigger and more amazing than God's work of creation? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So go then and look at creation all around us and witness what God has done. And then go deeper. Go and look at our world and all the chaos that lies within it. Take a look within your own life and search out the unsettling chaos within you. And in so looking, see what God can create. See what God is creating. See what God can do. See what God is doing. And then give thanks. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto God now and forever.